It is fantastic to see you all in 2019, the first of our series of lectures here for the Boston Society of Neurology, Neurosurgery, and Psychiatry. I have some unfortunate news, however. I want to apologize. Our speaker, one of our speakers, Dr. Omar Arno, will not be able to be with us tonight. Despite that, the show must go on. So I'll be speaking, and then of course we have our discussant here with us today, Dr. Lisa Rosenbaum. She's a cardiologist here at the Brigham and also a correspondent for the New England Journal, who's written a number of very important perspective pieces, and she'll be helping us reframe our zeal for AI. I am clearly very encouraged by the promise that it holds, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the work that we've been doing. I'll give you a little bit of history because I think it's important that we understand where all of this zeal is coming from. And then I'll talk to you about the difference between a lot of the terms that people throw around a lot in different publications, and then sort of walk you through a lot of the projects that we've been using machine learning for. So welcome. What year is this? Established 1880. What? Hassan, help me. What is this? This is the 1051st meeting of the Boston Society, which I am told is the oldest neurologic society in the world. That at least keeps records. So it's great to be here with you. Do we have any other announcements, anything that I need to say before this will be recorded. So that's important for a lot of you hyperverbal audience members. This will be recorded for posterity. So no heckling from the audience. Okay? All right, let's get started here. I'm going to be talking a little bit about, I have actually given it 3 titles. One is AI, one is machine learning, and one is data science. And I think these get used almost interchangeably. And I apologize ahead of time. I'm ADHD and I have a hard time standing in one location. So I will be roaming around this floor. This is my name. This is where I work. Isn't this beautiful? We are adjacent to this building right here. It's one of my favorite buildings on the campus. And I want to talk a little bit about why sort of data science or artificial intelligence, why it's becoming an ethical issue, where have we come from, and what our response has been to this. And then I'm going to give you some examples of the work that we do, and then we'll just touch briefly, if we have time. I'm going to really hand this off to Dr. Rosenbaum to really delve into the ethical issues, because you can imagine that I am not an ethicist. And honestly, either is she, but she's graciously allowed herself to be here to go through this with me. I want to give you a brief history, though, and this, to me, is so compelling. Statistical history. The history of how we deal with numbers. I mean, I could read books on this ad nauseum at night every single night of the week. I know, it's hard to believe, but it's true. So I want to talk to you a little bit about Bayes, a little bit about Ronald Fisher, Sir Ronald Fisher. Talk about probability and frequentism and how these things are a little bit in competition throughout time. And then the strengths and weaknesses of little and big data, and then talk about the future of data in terms of machine learning and how we've gotten there. And we have to go back to 1701. Thomas Bayes, minister, philosopher, and statistician. Trifecta. He came up with this concept of inverse probability, and all of you know what probability is. He was the first to sort of discuss the concept of inverse probability, and why was he thinking about it? Because at the time, in the 1700s, when he was living, people spent a lot of time reflecting on how they could prove that God was real. And this is what he was doing as a mathematician and a minister. He wanted the world to know, hey, God must be real because of what we see around us. So he wasn't asking, God is real, therefore the environment. He was saying, hey, if we have this environment around us, then what's the inverse probability that God made it all? So he came up with this very interesting solution to this problem, and he invented the concept of the prior, which all of the statisticians in the room are very familiar with. The concept of our prior biases that help inform our decision-making currently and help us develop what we call posteriors. And he had this thought experiment about the table and the ball. Many of you already know what this is. But this is imagine, I'm going to ask Dr. Rosenbaum to help me. Would you help me, Dr. Rosenbaum? Would you sit right here in this chair for me? And I want you to face the audience. I'm going to be standing behind you. And imagine behind you there's a table right behind you. And I have an infinite number of balls back here. And I'm going to place one on the table, which I've just done. Right here. I'm going to ask you, Dr. Rosenbaum, on this table, where is that ball? Well, you can even be more specific. Your ignorance about where this ball is equal on every point of that table. In other words, we could say that you have a 50-50 prior that this ball could be anywhere. Right? 50-50 chance that it could be anywhere on the table based on your knowledge. And you say, yes, that's right, Dr. Smith. Is it good? Oh, you have a mic here. You can turn that on and use it.
She said, why isn't it 100%?
Why isn't it 100% that you know where the ball is on the table?
You told me it's on the table.
No, where it's on the table. Where exactly is it on the table?
I don't know.
You don't know. So it could be anywhere.
Right?
With equal probability.
Right.
So we'll say 50-50. It could be anywhere. Okay, just go with me on this one.
Yes, Dr. Smith.
Okay, thank you. Now, I have another ball, Dr. Rosenbaum, and I'm placing it on the table, and this time I'm placing it to the right of the first ball. Now, what do you know now?
That it's to the right of
Yeah, you have a little bit more information. You can imagine that if I just put more and more on the table and each time told you where it was in relation to the first, how many do you think it would take before you said, you know what, I'm fairly certain that the first ball is located in a specific location? And let's say the table is 4 by 4 feet, and these balls are about the size of, let's say, a tennis ball. How many do you think it would take? Do you think it would take 2, 5, 10, 100?
100.
You've played Battleship, yeah?
Uh-huh.
There's going to be some number where you have a probability that becomes pretty defined.
Okay.
And this basic idea is the foundation of Bayes' theorem. That given enough prior information, by the way, let's give Dr. Rosenbaum a hand. Great job. Yeah, you can go back to your seat. Thank you. You were amazing. Given enough prior information, we can inform our posterior sufficiently to have very reliable predictions or probabilities. And he developed this idea. But it really wasn't until Laplace, who was living in France and at a different era, Laplace was really the person that applied these theories in meaningful ways that became public knowledge. As a matter of fact, Bayes didn't even publish this information. He died. Posthumously, his confidant, his friend, Price, actually published it. And it was only after his death that it became introduced into the Royal Society. So Laplace reads this theorem, and even though it was not incredibly well developed, realizes how genius it was. And he starts using Bayes' theorem, although not so called, to start calculating incredible probabilities in France. So, mathematician, by the way, this is a who's who of all of my heroes in this talk. So, mathematician, statistician, physicist, and astronomer. If you know J.P. Anella, he reminds me of Laplace. From 1750. He studied Copernicus, Newton, Kepler, classically trained. He was the Einstein of his day. He wanted to answer questions like, was the universe stable? Now, Alex, you're asking important questions about brain metastasis. But can you imagine asking a question like that? And how would you go about answering it? What data would you use to support that claim? How about the end of the world? When is it coming? When's the cataclysmic end of the universe? And so he was very interested in planetary motions. So how to tackle these questions? He took disparate data from across the millennia. Chinese data from 100 BCE, Chaldean from 600, Greek, Roman, Arabic from 1000 AD, spanning millennia, combined this data, weighted it, and came up with unbelievably accurate predictions of planetary orbits. Very impressive. And, of course, he was using large amounts of data. He was given a more mundane task by the King of France. Because as you know, Europe is in perpetual state of war in this era. And so they were losing men in war. And so he wanted to know how many boys would be born in the next year. And he tasked Laplace to find this out. So, given a birth rate of boy to girl at the time of 52 to 48, we can go into that, why that might be later. An example of 58,000 boys, you have to multiply 0.52 times itself 57,999 times by hand, and then repeat for girls. So I think of all the people in my lab that sit there at a computer in my dry lab, and they complain about all the calculations. Imagine this, pen and paper. He's going through an unbelievable number of hand calculations for such a simple problem, a simple probability issue. He developed the central limit theorem, which is the basis for normal distributions, for those of you in the room that know your distributions. And this, however, unfortunately moved Laplace to what we now know as frequentism. And Sir Ronald Fisher is what took the concept of frequentism and laid the foundation for all of the statistical maneuvers that we use in classical statistics today. I mean, it's absolutely incredible what he did. 1919, he was in the Rothamsted Agricultural Experiment Station because there were very few jobs in mathematics at the time. And he was analyzing volumes of crop data, and specifically, he was really working with soils, seeds and soils. And so he was really, I mean, I hate to use the word shitty, but he had a very soil-based job. And he was initially using Bayes, but then he decided, you know what, I don't want to test the entire population of seeds. That's too time-consuming. What I really need to do is select some smaller sample that's representative, run some experiments on these seeds, and then I'd be able to infer back to the larger population. And so he developed the basis for inferential statistics, p-values, standard deviations, unbelievable wealth of knowledge coming from Sir Ronald Fisher. And he started what now has become the foundation for evidence-based medicine, all the biostats that we use. Sampling, randomization, test of significance, maximum likelihood, ANOVA, experimental design. I mean, incredible. But why are we discussing this? Well, because interestingly, in my lifetime, we have seen the propagation of the randomized control trial. And this shows you, I think this is working, in 2000, there were approximately, according to the federal government, trials.gov, 4,000 trials in the US, total, that were registered. Now, 2017, there are 200,000 trials. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is the outcome or the pay, the value from all of the propagation of trials, orders of magnitude more trials? Well, I've taken the liberty to summarize the data for you in this table. And I want you to focus in here on this red circle. So this is an interventional surgical trial, of which, in this year, which this was run in 2016, there were 18,000, which represents 8.7% of the total number of trials. What percentage of those trials had results that posted? So there was 18,000 trials that were run. How many of those 18,000 actually published results? 5%. Does that number ring a bell for anyone? Is it ironic to you that if you were to run a trial 100 times, what percentage of the time would you, by random chance, come up with a difference that was spurious? Well, depending on what you, according to Ronald Fisher, what you set the alpha and the beta at, let's say p.05, 5% of the time. I mean, it's crazy. You'd think that I actually engineered this. I did not. I discovered this. 5% of the time. And by the way, these are not 5% of the trials that were positive, 5% that were reported. So that means they were either positive or trending towards positivity, otherwise they wouldn't be published. So why have we now become so fixated on big data and the promise of machine learning? Well, because I think in large part because of some of the limitations that we have just briefly addressed. That even though there was an era in which taking samples that were great samples and inferring back to a population, when was that developed? In what era? In an era when there were no other options for analyzing populations. You couldn't get access to the population if you wanted it, and even if you did have the data, how would you possibly analyze it? You didn't have the tools. So fast forward in time, the world has changed, and now, because of a digital revolution, which we can go through the different epochs, we now have access to massive amounts of data. In fact, we're starting to approximate having population-level data available to us about different diseases. And, coincidentally, we also have access to computational methods and power that allows us to actually analyze it in a meaningful time period. So many people now are going back to Bayes, going back to probability. And there's a lure of big data. And I want you to know that I'm a huge fan of big data, but I also understand that I am seduced by big data many, many times. If you think about a randomized controlled trial, the less control you have over the intervention, the less useful the trial becomes. So you think of a perfect trial. The perfect trial is the matrix. It's the factual, counterfactual setup. Red pill, blue pill. Everything else exactly the same. That's a perfect scenario for a randomized controlled trial. But in surgery, many, many times, I would say, dare say every time, it's never red pill, blue pill. Because even if I'm the red pill, I'm the jagged little pill in this scenario. So you have to get surgery with me. Even if I do the surgery every single time, it's still going to be a little bit different every time, even if I do it. But in most surgical trials, it's not just me doing them, it's a whole group of surgeons spread across time and space and country and institution, and it makes interpreting the results incredibly challenging because you haven't controlled for the intervention. But big data gives us a promise. Hey, if you collect enough of this, then you'll be overwhelmed with data and information. You'll be able to come up with meaningful conclusions about interventions. It's personalized. A lot of it's in situ. It's at home. Wearable technology, cloud-based reporting and analysis, predictive analytics, patient-reported outcomes, registries for entire populations, even physiologic monitoring. I mean, I can see the excitement on your face, Barb. It's amazing. What is big data? Many definitions for this, but it's incredibly large, high velocity, high variety, high volume data sets. And this sort of goes back to Moore's law, which we don't spend a lot of time on, but it's the idea of how technology multiplies exponentially. Where's all this data? Well, it's coming from everywhere now. I mean, all of us in this room have devices on us that are collecting data about us. And this refers to Moore, Gordon Moore in 1965. He noticed something interesting, is that the transistors in computer chips multiplied, they doubled. So they had exponential growth, and this became Moore's law. Predicts that this trend will continue into the foreseeable future, and it looks like a graph based on sort of our fourth industrial revolution, where here we have Industry 1.0, right? We developed the steam engine, which is amazing. Then we have mass production. Then we have automation, computers, electronics, and now we have cyber and physical systems, networks, the Internet of Things. Acceleration in technology, printing press, 1400. Who's responsible for this? Hans Gutenberg. How do you know that, Alex? Oh, is that on? Oh, okay. Alex, thank you. Hans Gutenberg. Okay. And then between there and the telescope was about, I don't know, 200 years. Between that and the steam engine, another 150. Telegraph, 50 years. Light bulb, 20. Telephone, car, man on the moon, and then it just takes off asymptotically. And this represents Moore's law. The acceleration and pace of technological growth. So here we go. I'm not going to go through all this. This is the name of the chip, which, look at this very carefully. This is so much information here. The name of the chip, the year that it came out, and the number of transistors, and this is an exponential axis. Okay, so now we're at, what is this, 20 million, 20 billion transistors on each chip. It's insane. Cost of computing power obviously dropping at the same rate. So now we have iPad 2 right here. And here we have, this space shuttle somewhere over here. The accelerating pace of change, I put this slide up because it's got a great concept on here, which apparently is going to happen in 2045, which we call the singularity. When the summation of all artificial intelligence will exceed that of the human capacity in my lifetime. Well, hopefully in my lifetime, depending on how many more cases I do this year. So if we put this into terms that we can sort of understand, from the dawn of time to the turn of the century, human beings created about 5 exabytes of data. Now, this is as of 2003, 5 exabytes every 2 days. Now it's 5 exabytes every day of data that we're making. Very different era than, let's say, Sir Ronald Fisher, soils and seeds. And, not surprisingly, it's followed through in the economics. So what are the 5 largest companies in the world now? What kind of companies are they? They don't make cars, steel, and oil. They are data companies. They collect, harness, and turn data into money. Apple, how much is Apple worth now, do you think, Barb? Just take a shot in the dark. Well, we all are, which is why we're here on a Thursday night, right? Give you choices? Hassan, what do you think? $1 trillion. How much money do they have in cash reserves? 300 billion. So they have more money in cash reserves than the GDP of the bottom of the countries that are not top 10. That's insane. It's a data company. It's a technology company. Yeah, it's a country in and of itself. The average hospital, so that we'll sort of narrow it down to hospitals now. The average hospital generates 665 terabytes of data. This is according to 2015. Estimated only 20% of this is actually structured data. This is just data that's out there waiting to be analyzed. Now, my lab, CNOC, works with a lot of this data. That's what this slide says. And a lot of our people are here. A lot of projects. This is our mission and our goal. We have a lot of great people working on these projects. And we use a lot of machine learning. These are our current projects and things that we do. But I really want to focus on a handful tonight. This is a brain tumor. And this is the left frontal lobe. This turns out to be a low-grade glioma. This is the surgery. And thank God I can show this photo. A lot of audiences that can't show these photos. They get lightheaded or they faint. But not you. You're strong. Yeah, this back here, all these letters, this is where we map this out. So the patient's awake, we're asking them to do things, move their arms, and then we map out the motor strip and we can take this out safely. What's interesting is that when we go to follow these patients, their quality of life, we don't use any technology that even approximates what we just used in the intraoperative MRI suite. Do you know what we do with these patients? I tell them to come in and see me. And then when they arrive, I ask them, how are you doing? And they tell me. And I go, okay, that sounds good. And I write that down. Maybe if I'm fastidious and really, really good, I'm going to have them take a survey. Because they have a brain tumor. What better thing for a brain tumor patient than to use their brain to tell me how they're feeling? So this is what we do. This is the current. And of course, it's a problem. Patients have inadequate insight, self-appraisal. These are brain tumor patients. Memory problems, confabulation. They want to please you. They don't want you to be upset with how they're doing. Subtle language, expression, comprehension, poor initiation, terrible memory. Hard to maintain this activity for any period of time. Inattention. Sounds like me, actually, a little bit. Poor visual spatial capacity. And this is our current clinical treatment paradigm, right, which is where you present. And what is this cycle around? Some acute episode of illness. But wouldn't it be great if there was some other way to treat patients so that we just weren't circling around them like vultures when they were sick? What if we could actually care for them throughout their entire lives, every day, all day long, without a lot of burden on them? Well, this is something that we've thought about because this is what my poor patients have to take. Can you imagine taking this survey? I'm going to sleep right now looking at it. This is the EORTC, which stands for what, Alex?
European Organization of Research and Treatment of Cancer.
Excellent. And what's the B in 20?
No idea.
The brain module. 20 extra questions. So on top of the 30 that you take for the regular, you got to add another 20 for the brain. Okay? Things like, did you have trouble finding the right words to express yourself? Which the irony is just so deep.
Yeah.
They would say, I can't find the word. So this is a problem. This is a fundamental problem. And of course, I'm making light of it because it's Thursday night and I don't want you to fall asleep during this incredibly long lecture. But it is actually a problem for our patients. So we have started collecting information about our patients using their smartphones. And I think everyone in here probably has a smartphone. Most of you are using them right now, which is okay. But the great thing about the smartphone is that it actually is with you at all times, and you are putting yourself through cognitive testing every time you use it. I don't have to put you through neuropsych testing, even though I love neuropsych testing. But I don't have to, because you're putting yourself through it when you interact with your phone. It's a digital, daily exam. But you might say, Dr. Smith, I have a phone, but you know what, I don't really use it that much. It stays in my pocket or in my purse, or I lay it on the counter. Well, I would argue that probably is not true. I will tell you that smartphones are the most widely and rapidly adopted technology since the beginning of time. If you think about the television, how long it took for everyone to have a TV in their home, 70 years roughly, give or take. The smartphone, it's become ubiquitous in just over 10 years. It was introduced in 2007. I mean, that wasn't that long ago. I was still a young man in 2007, but it wasn't that long ago. And now, by 2020, the estimate is that 90% of all people over the age of 6 in the world will own a smartphone. It's insane. The average American, which if you're average, touches their smartphone 2,617 times a day. Carol, are you above or below that? You're above. Me too. Me too. I actually have my phone on me. I have it right here because I feel if I get more than like 4 or 5 feet away from it, I start having an anxiety attack. I have to know. So if you put this into perspective on the amount of data that we're creating from these smartphones, you know, the first 10,000 years is 5 exabytes. We now produce it every day, and half of it is coming from your smartphone. And we have decided, and when I say we, I mean myself and a group of people. One of the most influential people of that group is Dr. J.P. Anella. He's at the Harvard School of Public Health. He's a data scientist. We developed this concept of digital phenotyping. We believe that we can take all of this data about you, and we can create a representation of who you are as a person, your behavior, your mood, your activity, your cognition, your sociability, all from your smartphone data. We've defined this as moment-to-moment quantification of the individual level human phenotype in situ using data from personal digital devices. And of course, our goal is to capture this in the lived experience of the patient at home with minimal interference. And we do active data, which is, we have them take surveys, but the vast majority of this is just passively acquired. And of course, this gives you an illustration of how long it's taken people to use the internet. I still remember the first time I saw the World Wide Web. I remember where I was. I remember the year. It was 1991 at the University of Illinois in a computer lab. I was sitting there using, I don't know, Word or something, typing up my lab report, and this woman sits down next to me to my right. And of course, I'm not looking at what she's doing, but out of the corner of my eye, I see something happening on her screen, and she clicks something, and this window appears. And in this window, words with blue words every once in a while, and then like a photo just like slowly rasters right in front of me. And then she would click on a blue word, and that page would go away, and then another page would appear. And I was like, what is this magic? So I had to talk to her. What are you using? She goes, oh, this is, I'm using something called Mosaic, which is a web browser. I'm like, web browser? What? What are you talking about? What's the web? And that was the first web browser ever developed at the University of Illinois, the National Academic Computing Center, and it became Netscape from there. And that was the beginning. I mean, I lived during this era. It is magical. I mean, I still think about it, and I just sort of reflect. How it's transformed. It's crazy. No one had a cell phone. Yeah, no one had a smartphone, no one had a cell phone. We had to track people down through their landline or meet them somewhere. I mean, it was insane. This is the information that we take from the smartphone, all of these data streams. All total, it's about 1 billion data points of data per month, per subject. Tremendous amount of data. And then we can use this data to, and this is, by the way, what it looks like on their phone. And we don't collect just the data itself, their answer. We collect data about how long it takes them to fill it out, how many times they changed their answer, how hard they pressed on the screen, the metadata about the data. And then we can develop these incredibly beautiful graphs, pain, locations, texting in, calling out. And we can take raw data, this is raw data from a single patient over a 6-week period. We can take this and start looking for correlations. And we can create these wonderful GPS motion maps. And this is one of our graduate students who's riding his bike down Longwood, tries to park it here before he comes into the lab. This is 5 minutes of data taken from his GPS off of his phone. I have all the people in my lab. They have this platform on their phone. It's on 24/7, 365. This is, of course, a fragment of such a data table. These are the outputs that we can get. And of course, we take this raw data and we can convert it into these beautiful spatial temporal maps. This is a mobility trace that has both information regarding time and location. Blue is night, red is day. And this would be an illustration of one of my typical weekdays. So where's this? Well, tonight, I guess it's the hospital. But normally it would be home. Blue would be home, right? I'm home at night, and I'm at work during the day, and this is Route 9, and this is the Brigham. We had a simple question. If people were in pain, would it change the amount that they move through the world? Because a lot of people tell us they're in pain. Oh, doc, I'm in pain. You got to do surgery. I'm in pain. I have pain. Like, I'm so sorry about your pain. What can we do about it? Well, we could give you narcotics. We could take you to surgery. We could have you get some PT, some conservative treatment. But the question is, are you really in pain? Or are you telling me that you're in pain for all the secondary gain? So we said, hey, is there a way that we could get to the bottom of this question and find out, are people really in pain? Yes. And if they are, is it changing their quality of life in terms of activity? So we had people fill out this little survey every day, which is the visual analog pain scale, which is the happy face here, 0, all the way to the I'm crying in so much pain face. And of course, you have people in clinic that tell you, how much pain are you in? They look at you and they smile and they go, I'm in 10 out of 10 pain. And you're like, well, look at this chart here. How would you, oh, I'm 10. I'm 10 out of 10. In fact, I think I'm 11. So you wonder, is this accurate? I mean, are they telling me accurately? And turns out this is the mobility trace for an average patient in our cohort for 2 pain-free days. It looks very, very similar. However, if they are in a severe pain day, this is what their trace looks like. So people who are in pain, and they're telling you they're in pain, turns out their quality of life changes. Their movement outside their home dramatically changes. So we have developed novel outcomes, things like how much time do you spend in movement every day? How much time do you spend upright? How much time do you spend sitting? How much time do you spend outside your house? Because we know based upon Wi-Fi data, which there's right now in this room, probably 150 to 200 Wi-Fi signals from various sources, we can triangulate for very specific areas in the room where you are. So we know whether or not, not just your home, where you're the first or second floor, whether you're in the kitchen, the bathroom, the bedroom, if you're lying down, sitting down, standing up, downstairs, walking, running, hopping, skipping, jumping. So we have a lot of information about activity. It's not just how many steps did you walk today. It's much deeper than that. And of course, things like your social network, which we will get into. Now, when we think about our brain tumor patients, and those are spine patients, they have tremendous cognitive challenges that they face. So we started to use various data streams from their phone that we felt represent some cognitive load. And If we think about sociability, so let's say that patient that had a frontal tumor, their executive function has been impaired, and so their sociability likely will be impaired. We can take just something like call logs, Monday to Sunday. This is from one patient every day, call logs coming in and out. And we can take these and we can construct incredibly complex social networks, digital networks. And we can see these changing over time as their frontal lobe function becomes impaired. One of the things that Dr. Onella talks about is his father, who unfortunately recently died from a supranuclear palsy. And he had with this a dementing illness. And the first thing he noticed, and this was about 7 years ago, was that his father stopped reaching out to him on his phone. So the texting went down, the calls went down, and so he had this idea, something is changing with my father. Turns out he had this terrible, unremitting disease. But we can build these incredibly complex networks. We can understand language. We have our patients do voice recordings every week. They read, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." They read this whole paragraph, and then we analyze their speech for prosody, for tone, intonation, lexicon, grammar, hydration of their vocal cords. And then we can integrate that with texting data, calling data, and spelling accuracy through texting, and come up with a pretty accurate picture of language function. I like this graph because this tells me that we can also track people's sleep. So here is a research-grade somnograph. This is what you would wear in a research sleep study. And here's 100 people all wearing these devices, and these black bars represent their night of sleep. This is the best we can do. We decided, well, what if we didn't have them wear this watch? What if we just checked their screen on-off state on their phone? So I don't know what you do with your phone at night. You don't have to tell me. But I can tell you what I do with mine. The last thing I do is I take my phone and I place it on my nightstand. I check my alarm for the following day, and I drift off to sleep. Now, I'm on call tonight, so my phone might illuminate throughout the night. It might try to contact me, but I may sleep through it, I may not. The next day, when I wake up, my alarm is going off on my phone, and it illuminates, I touch the screen, and I wake up. So I'm thinking to myself, yeah, you could probably track my sleep pretty well, even if you didn't use interactivity with the screen, just on and off. So that's what we did here. We superimposed these two data sets in the same group of people and found out that the correlation's insanely high. Now, we don't need them to wear these little sleep devices. We just check their phones, and we can tell you what their sleep patterns are. Mood, something that we're moving into now, which I really am excited about, because it is trying to get at the emotional content of how you use your phone. I love this study, which to say the word study is a little bit generous, but I love this report. This came out of the UK not too long ago and is published in the Telegraph. And what they did with 15 people is they brought them into a room, and it was so simple, so elegant. They took a photo. They gave them one drink and took another photo. They gave them 2 drinks, took another, and 3 and another. This is with 15 people. And it was wild, the similarities between all of these disinhibited people. The trend over time was the amount of emotional, affective content in your face. You stop regulating it, and it just comes through. And you can see that here. I mean, by the time people got to the 4th frame, their tie is wrapped around their head, their hair is flowing in the wind, their hands are up, their eyes are open, both layers of teeth are being seen. And this is true in the photos that we see people post on social media. Their emotional content, it can be seen from their face. And this can be analyzed with machine learning. And we can come up with scales for this. What about this group here? This is something that a lot of people use now, these emoticons. Why do they use them? Well, because it's very difficult to express tone through written words. So this is a way that you can tell people that you're feeling, I guess, angry or nauseous. And these clearly, right, have emotional content. But even beyond this, if you don't have access to emoticons, people also use their language very differently when they're texting. So they'll spell words differently because they want to emphasize something about the word, like yes means a very strong yes. Or so means, you know, it's been going on for a long time, like this lecture. Or lots of exclamation points. Lots of question marks, exclamation points. There's someone in this audience who I will not name, that every time I get a text from this woman, who I love dearly, it is filled with exclamation points and question marks combined. And I never know whether I'm being shouted at or whether it's excitement. And so I've talked to her about it, and she's just saying, no, it's just something I want you to respond to right away. So people use these textisms in their texting all the time, and we can analyze this and come up with some quantifiable emotional content of their mood at that time. And then, of course, there's all these cognitive domains that everyone here in the room probably knows better than I do, especially the psychiatrist sitting in the front row. I believe that essentially there's a number of activities that you engage in on your phone every day that's going to be taxing these domains. And the question is, can we parse these out and come up with passive digital data streams that reflect these individual areas? And I'm very optimistic that we can. And of course, what do we use to analyze all this data? Well, we use artificial intelligence, machine learning, cloud-based machine learning. And of course, why do we do that? Because no possible way that classical statistics could accommodate this volume and variety of data. It would just break down. Rania, do you agree? Thank you. She's a statistician. So, 1950, Alan Turing comes up with, he writes a book, or writes a report, and from that, people come up with this idea of the Turing test, that a computer, 1950, amazing, huh? Well, no, this is his Computing Machinery and Intelligence publication. Before that, he came up with these ideas clearly during World War II with the Enigma, that whole project, yeah. So, but the Turing test is a computer can be said to be intelligent if a human being can't judge or tell whether he's interacting with a human or a machine. That's sort of the idea of a Turing test. And out of this comes this concept of artificial intelligence. Can you have systems and machines that function and think generally like a human being? And if we were to put this all on one slide, artificial intelligence is the largest circle here. It's a program or software or system that can sense, reason, act, and adapt. Very few things in the world have achieved this level of general artificial intelligence. Most of it's right in here, which is machine learning. Algorithms whose performance improves as they are exposed to more and more data over time. And then there's deep learning, which is embedded, nested algorithms, which are organized biologically, theoretically, like our own central nervous system, where you have a layer, let's say, of regression models that then feed into another layer of regression models that then feed into another layer, and you can imagine why this is called deep learning. And these do really well with lots and lots of data. Probably the perfect application for deep learning is image recognition, which is what it's been used for a lot. This is, in words, what I just said. A table comparing artificial intelligence versus machine learning. What it is, how it functions, and how we categorize it. So what are some examples here? Voice, Siri. Siri is a form of artificial intelligence on my phone. And every once in a while, my phone will start talking to me because I say a word that sounds like Siri. Like, are you serious? And then Siri goes, Dr. Smith, did you have a question? I'm like, no, Siri, shut up. I said the word serious. Please distinguish between these two words. I'm sick of dealing with this. So she's pretty good, but not amazing. Natural language processing, computer vision, right, where the most famous example is, I think it was IBM that trained their computer to recognize a cat. Show a computer a picture of anything, and it could say one thing. This is a cat, or it's not. And, you know, that's impressive. But, I mean, it's not incredible. I mean, I could talk to Barb, and Barb could tell me, yeah, that's a cat. And if it's not a cat, you could say that's a water bottle. So, I mean, that's a huge step forward, right? So, I mean, artificial intelligence is amazing, but it's nowhere near sometimes what the popular press sort of sells it as. Then there, under machine learning, we have things like supervised, unsupervised reinforcement learning. This is where you just give a machine a giant training set, and it learns after looking at cat, 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 dog, 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 dog. It finally gets the concept of cat. It can identify cat. And then, of course, there's methods, which is what I was classically trained in, the ability to reason through regression, decision trees, et cetera. And, of course, all the technologies that allow us to do all these things. And these are sort of embedded in everything, which is why I think it's kind of humorous when people talk about classical statistics as like a different thing from artificial intelligence or machine learning. Because all machine learning is taking classical techniques and expanding them into unrestrained versions of algorithms that aren't held to the same assumptions that we have to give inferential statistics, like is the population normally distributed? You remember when you took stats? Remember that? Now, there's 15 times you took it over the course of your education, you relearned it every time because you can't remember these crazy rules. And there's all these rules like the population has to be normally distributed. We're assuming that there's a sample size that's a certain number, and you're like, why are we making these assumptions? Because these models were built on these assumptions, and you can't use the models if the assumptions don't hold. So machine learning doesn't have these assumptions. We've made them unrestrained. This is a pictorial example of one of the papers that we published a year or two ago about all the sort of different kinds of machine learning that we've used in our lab to analyze big data. And this is the artificial neural networks, or deep learning, or convoluted networks. And these are all machine learning techniques. And we won't get into these. How have we used them? Let's see. I have to keep using the time here. It's 7:56. And we started late. So I have 15 minutes. Okay. Virtual biopsy is an example. This is something from Dr. Omar Arno and the Martinos lab. Can we sample digitally a brain tumor and not have to physically biopsy it? Can we get enough information from the MRI to give us its molecular status and the nature of the tumor without the need to do an invasive biopsy? And that would be exciting. So we have a virtual biopsy. So what is this tumor? It's in a location that's a little bit challenging to get to. It's on the dominant side, the left side, posterior temporal, next to the brainstem. Probably not an easy location to get to. Certainly not for Dr. Arno. He's not here, so I feel like I can. Uh-oh, karma. I'm sorry, Dr. Arno. Forgive me. Yeah, is it because I dropped it to go off? Or? No, no. It's reaching out from home. Oh, there we go. Oh, there we go. I've got it now. Okay. So there's these ideas of all these molecular subtypes within gliomas that become very important with determining overall survival. Things like IDH wild type versus mutant, MGMT status. So can we determine this status? I got it. Thanks, boss. Based on its imaging. Turns out, yes, we can. And this is important because it changes survival. So this is the way that this study was set up, which we won't go into. And this is the machine learning algorithm that it goes through. It's a way of reinforcement learning over time. And it turns out that we can come up with a pretty decent area under the curve, 95% accuracy for predicting molecular status for IDH wild type versus mutant based on machine learning models from MRIs of tumors, which is amazing. Can we do this for GBM? So these are the studies that are now being worked on. The 1p19q co-deletion, MGMT status, EGFR, all of these mutations are being worked on right now. Natural language processing, these people in my lab really love, right? Because most of us are just pouring through charts looking for data, but can we program a computer to do this for us? Because it seems like a colossal waste of the human mind to sit there and work through an electronic medical record to find information, to then transfer to another sheet that then you then clean, structure, and analyze. So it makes no sense. Why not just have a computer do this for us? And so we started with radiology reports, looking for keywords, identifying, dichotomizing, structuring, and being able to classify tumors based on the radiology reports without us reading them. And this was published for glioma. Can we discriminate different kinds of tumors, not just their molecular status, but is this a lymphoma versus a GBM? Is this tumor progression versus treatment effect using an MRI? This is something that one of our fellows did, I think last year, Dr. Yuki Senders. He developed a high-grade glioma survival calculator based upon these techniques, where you can just put in, essentially, the patient's own demographics, and it will give you a pretty accurate survival estimate for that individual patient. We've done automatic segmentation for meningioma, which I think is very important because it gives you volumes, which is much better than just looking at the scan and going, oh, I think it's bigger. And we're also now using machine learning to identify histopathology. Now, some people would say, you're just eliminating the jobs for doctors. And I don't see that happening anytime soon. I think what I see happening is that there's going to be doctors that use machine learning to go through things like what are the malignant features on this slide, and there'll be doctors that don't. And the doctors that use it will probably get ahead in life and do more with their lives and go into their families. And the doctors that don't will eventually be phased out. It's just another piece of technology, like a microscope or a laser or a bipolar electrocardiogram. You just adopt the technology. So the future of data, and I'm going to wrap this up really quickly because it's 8 o'clock. I'm just going to cut to the chase, and this is what I see as the future of data and machine learning. I, number one, feel strongly that it should be open source, transparent, reproducible, scalable, economic, including all forms of data, including data from RCTs, rare diseases for entire populations. And I'm a huge believer in the Bayesian notion, Laplacian notion, data integration, that we should be able to bring together multiple data streams to make much more informed decisions than just one particular very clean and refined data set. For instance, deep data could be tissue bank or biobank, molecular data, genetic, clinical, outcome assessments, imaging, digital phenotyping, and come up with an amazing precision medicine for an entire population. So big data, as many deep data, big data, wide data, all these different, whatever. But this is how I see it. I see it as data topography, where you're just layering data on top of each other, and each layer gives you a different description of that particular thing. And so if you think about what our data goals should be here at the Brigham or here in healthcare, it should have individual data, right, that's layered, which is then connected to the entire population. These are the ethical concerns, of which there are numerous. Security issues, transparency issues, anonymity issues, ownership issues, access, autonomy, consent, privacy, data sharing, open versus closed data sets. All of these have tremendous, tremendous issues, which we're going to talk about in a second. I want to conclude with this slide because this is probably my biggest hero in statistics, John Tukey, who was a chairman at Princeton in mathematics in the stats department. And he said this, which I live by this actually. My lab lives by this. It's far better an approximate answer to the right question, which is often vague, than an exact answer to the wrong question, which can always be made precise. And this is what I think is the beauty of Bayesian approaches and the beauty of machine learning and big data, is that you can start approximating answers to the right questions that historically, even if you asked them, you wouldn't be able to answer. Okay, now, so that's my talk. Now we have with us, thank you, Dr. Rosenbaum. We're going to open it up now for questions regarding machine learning, data science, artificial intelligence, and then we'll discuss the answers.
Do you want me to come?
Yeah, would you just stand right here? Yeah, you don't have to sit down. Yeah, you can stand here. First of all, thank you for listening. I know that was a little bit long. Thank you. The slow clap even. Thank you. Let's start with questions from the audience. Anyone have any thoughts or questions, comments or concerns? Yes, sir.
Clinicians are in the thrall of the patient's self-report. Dr. Freud said the report is biased, and you did too. The digital phenotyping and the kind of the dynamic aspect of that, I presume, could you use that, or can you see it theoretically, to make a more accurate history of the present illness?
I mean, I certainly believe that. Now, I'm going to have Dr. Rosenbaum talk about bias and trade-offs because I think she's written a lot about that. But I will say this, getting to the truth, however you define that, is an immense challenge with human beings. Because, depending on your philosophy on why you have frontal lobes, some of us believe that you have them as a giant rationale for explaining away your desires. And what do I mean by that? I mean, if I want to do something, then what do? I create a reason why I should do something. And we have these massive frontal lobes that are designed for reasoning, regulation, initiation, organization of what? What are they organizing? Our limbic system, which is our emotional center, which if you look back from an evolutionary perspective, what is the limbic system of a rat? What is it doing for this rat? What are these pathways for? Well, it's for olfaction and gustatory, so smell and taste. I mean, the massive part of their brain. Why? Because it's about finding food, surviving, right? And they got to know, can I eat this, yes or no? We have the same structures in place, the same networks. Now, of course, we can still smell and we can still taste, but we've co-opted these same networks to interpret preferences on things around us, like people. So this makes it incredibly challenging to get to the truth with people and with patients. There are so many different reasons on why someone will tell you how they feel, and it's an incredible challenge. So if you think about what do we have to do to encourage people to be truth tellers, well, there's a lot that we could do with them, but one thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we've stripped away whatever other secondary gain they're there for in the clinic. And secondarily, we have to make them feel comfortable that they will not be judged for telling us how they feel. And the beautiful thing about digital phenotyping is that they feel so anonymous. They're just walking around with their phone. They're not reporting to anyone. They're not showing up at an office. They're not talking to some yahoo in a white coat who thinks he owns the world, right? They're just living their life. And so I think it's probably one of the closest approximations to who people really are, because it's just tracking you individually, alone, in your world. That's a very long answer, but that's my sense of it. Biases?
I mean, I think I have 3 things to say about that. First, as a cardiologist, I think you're right. What kind of doctor are you? Okay, so I don't know so much about how Freud believed that the HPI was biased, but I can tell you for sure that when I'm writing an HPI, I'm making an argument. You know, I think this patient's having an NSTEMI, and I am making a statement about the character of the chest pain and the troponin elevation and, you know, how it started and what relieved it, et cetera. But I think that the 2 points that are relevant to what Tim's talking about and this promise of AI are, first of all, I think that, as every patient will tell you when they come to see the doctor, they don't get their story out. They always leave feeling like they forgot to say something, or some of the most beautiful times is when you see a couple together and somebody will interject and say, no, remember what happened, you know, so you know they're forgetting things. So I think beyond sort of the potential of digital phenotyping for this specific ability to follow up a brain tumor recurrence, or I think actually some of the most incredible potential is in mental illness, where we sort of can potentially see the first psychotic break or things like that. I think that we're going to find that new ways of getting patient stories in a way that we can integrate into the EHR that is more signal than noise than it already is. And then the third thing I'll say, though, is, and one of the risks is then how to figure out how to do that and then maintain what everybody is longing for and feels is missing, which is that sort of essential dynamic between the patient and the physician. And so I think that part of what you are going to be forced to figure out as you do this is sort of how to still make people feel like there's that personal interaction. And, you know, I think that a lot of the privacy concerns could be tempered if people still felt like they had a doctor. And so I think that's going to be the challenge that's a little less quantifiable, but will ease the pathway and the transition into doing more of this data collection as sort of a primary source of diagnosis and follow-up.
Can I just play the devil's advocate on a follow-up to that response?
Of course. Oh, you have one.
So I completely agree with you that patients want to interact with a human being. They don't want to call into a phone tree. They want to talk to a person. But I also believe that it is quantifiable.
How?
That bedside manner
Oh, we disagree on this, yeah.
is quantifiable. I believe that. I actually believe, and I haven't done this, but I believe that if we were to record interactions between physicians and patients with 3 cameras, one on the patient's face, one on the physician's face, and one on both of them, their entire bodies, and we were to analyze that with machine learning, that we would come up with a set of behaviors, sounds, pauses, words, that we could then quantify on a empathy scale.
To what end? I mean, so
Because we're always wondering, can we teach this? Can we teach people to be empathetic? My mother certainly tried. But can we, all the medical students coming up, all these future doctors, you know, they sit through these classes and they learn, can we teach them to be an empathetic person? Or are you just sort of born empathetic and or you're raised in an empathetic family and so you've become empathetic? Because if we can't teach it, then that's a little bit depressing to me.
But you and I disagree about this. Okay. I do not believe empathy can be taught. I think patients sense out fake empathy. I really do. But you can study it and let me know.
Okay.
what
Alex, yeah.
Find.
First of all, thank you so much for this amazing talk and this amazing discussion. I'm going to very briefly tune into the empathy discussion. So I'm a medical student from the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, we spend a lot of time actually training empathy and bedside manner. So I think I would agree with both of you that I think you can teach it to a degree.
And what are they?
You also have a baseline empathy that you need to have. Sorry.
What are they doing to train you, Alex, to be empathetic?
Sure. So they're not using machine learning for one. Perhaps unfortunately.
I mean, it's working like a charm for you, so.
Thank you so much. Well, there's I think the most important thing about our lessons about how to deal with patients. So we have actors and we simulate situations. And we're essentially training.
So you're put into fake situations.
Yes.
With not real patients.
That's right.
And they're telling you to be truly empathetic.
Yes.
I mean, I just see difficulties with this model. But you feel like it's effective?
I do think it's helped me and all of my peers communicating with patients in proper manners. And I guess it sort of touches on the question of what truly is empathy. Is empathy truly caring about the patient? In that case, you can teach it. Or is it more about the outward showing of that? And I think that truly caring about the patient is not something you can teach, because that's something you need to do, and that's something you need to select for. If you don't care about patients, you probably shouldn't go into medicine. So I think medical schools in the Netherlands and the US are doing a good job on that. Because all of the people that I've met are always very caring for patients. But bedside manner, that particular term is more about, okay, you care, but how do you express that? And then that is something that
Hmm.
I'm just not 100% convinced that you need machine learning to do that. But maybe it can help.
Well, I'm not saying we need machine learning. I think we could quantify it through machine learning. Because, you know, there are really empathetic doctors like Dr. Rosenbaum. You watch her with patients, incredibly empathetic. She'll come in just like I've done with you. I've sat down in a chair to demonstrate to you that I have time for you. Now, right now, I'm pretending to be empathetic, but you may not know that. And how would you tell? Whereas Dr. Rosenbaum is authentically empathetic at all times. And I do agree with you. I think there's a very thin line between those two things. And I like the point that you're making between sort of having this authentic desire to help people, and that is different than learning to communicate to people. Those are two different things. Yeah, do you have a question?
So, do you think that physician's empathy has a quantifiable effect on the end outcome of patient's health?
I absolutely believe that.
I mean,
yeah.
Why not have something like some cold-hearted physician in the back room making the decisions and then tell that to someone who's naturally empathetic and just have them go communicate that to the patient?
Well, we kind of do have that, actually. We do have that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we have, you know, on many levels, we actually have this model. So there's a certain self-selection into specialty. And so if you become a neurosurgeon, that means a couple of things. One is you have an ego the size of the sun. It also means that you probably are not great at being other-centered. So what happens is you build a team around this neurosurgeon to help them communicate to patients. So around every neurosurgeon, there is a human shield of PAs, NPs, residents, nurses that do the majority of interfacing with the patients through a team-based approach. And this delivers the patient from having to interface with the neurosurgeon on a daily basis. If you go into cardiology, however, as a group, these are some of the most empathetic people, or psychiatrists. I mean, these, by definition, people that select into psychiatry are just incredibly high baseline levels of empathy for other people. So I do think on many levels we do that. Many patients, interestingly, seem like they want to make this false dichotomy that you either have to have, you know, if I had to choose between having an asshole for a surgeon who is technically gifted or a warm and caring individual who is terrible at surgery, I would take the former. And I just don't quite understand why we've dichotomized them this way. Why are these two things correlated? I don't think they are. I think some people are just not nice, and other people are, you know? I think it's an excellent question of what patients really want. I do, to answer your first question, I absolutely think that when patients feel like they're cared for, they do much better. Now, I don't know whether it's because they've reframed how they're doing into a positive light because of how they feel, or whether it's because they actually are doing better. But certainly, if you're talking about the number of people calling into the clinic, how they feel when they see you, what they report on their surveys, it's all going to be better if they feel good about the interaction.
There's a psychologist named Paul Bloom at Yale who's written a book or two, I think, called Against Empathy. And his argument is that empathy makes us irrational and unable to weigh trade-offs and actually has tremendous social consequences. And I think for all I believe in empathy, and I do as a physician, I think there's something to be said for I think there's a reason there is a bit of self-selection because of what you have to do, Dr. Smith, in the OR. There is a certain amount of sort of suspending your ability to think about how this person feels. Maybe I'm wrong because I don't do it, but I think you have to be able to set it aside.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an element of that, but that's with patients who are asleep. But I do have the capacity to turn off my empathy almost instantaneously when the patient's intubated. But I do feel like when they're awake and interactive, you have to have some capacity to empathize with them.
I just wanted distinguish empathy from listening.
Mm.
I think we overvalue empathy and we undervalue really listening to what the patient is saying about their experience. Consciously and unconsciously, you know, between the lines.
How would you define real listening?
Well, I don't know if I can do it on the spot. I'll have to try, but it's really understanding what the patient is trying to say to you, which means understanding the language they're using, the cultural context, how they think about, you know, the causes of disease, why do they have this, the fears they have, all kinds of things are being conveyed to you. This is you know, they're coming to see you, whether it's for neurosurgery, cardiology, psychiatry, whatever. It's one of the most important hours, half hours of their life. And there's so much packed in there that they want to convey. And of course, as a physician, you've got an hour and you have a million other things in your mind, and you really just want to know, did they have a heart attack? Or, you know, what's the diagnosis? Or, so your brain is preoccupied with that. But one of the most important tasks you have is to translate from what the patient's experiences into this other language in which you think about diagnosis and so on. But in order to do that, you first have to know what is the patient saying. I would say that's what listening is.
I think that's why I've always had, and I've never been able to articulate it as well as you just did, but I had an aversion to the empathy training I had in medical school, which was the genesis of why I don't believe in teaching it. But it's because it's pseudo listening. So the patient, they say something like, I feel really sick today. And you say, I'm sorry you feel sick today. And then we think that we've accomplished some goal. So it's that makes me recoil, less than maybe there is a way to teach listening or something, but I don't think that we're effectively doing that.
See, I would say listening would be, oh, you feel sick? In what way?
Yeah, tell me more.
You know, like, and then, and you feel nauseous, or you feel whatever. What do you mean by that? Because the words patients use don't necessarily mean the same thing. You might use the word and mean something completely different. But I think, just stepping back 1 second, it's incredibly interesting that we're talking about empathy and listening and the doctor-patient relationship in a lecture about AI.
Well, that's...
And, you know...
Because I think a lot,
okay.
I'm not listening to you, I'm sorry. I think it's because people have a fundamental fear. When you talk about machine learning, artificial intelligence, that you're eliminating the human element from medicine. Yeah. That we're just slowly disconnecting ourselves from the humanity of delivering care to patients, which I think is why we've migrated to talking about empathy after this lecture.
This is a counter burnout issue.
Yeah.
Why do we have burnout? We have burnout because people are feeling automated.
Yeah.
And controlled.
Yeah, sir.
There is large motivation to eliminate jobs. The radiologist is a pattern recognizer, and the artificial intelligence will recognize the pattern. Now, also psychotherapists like me. My colleague made a program that automatically treats depression. So he is very clever. He beamed it up to the astronauts running around the world, because the nice view out the window is not enough to sustain you for months and months. You're cooped up in this place where you don't see your family. You start to get bored. You start to get depressed. It's a very high incident trouble of astronauts. He gave this program, and they got relieved according to standard.
And that this was a program that they would speak to, and then it would give them responses. It would have them sort of explore their feelings.
Myself, they say, okay, what's wrong? And you say this, and they have a large algorithm to go down to the, well, or tell me more, or I'd like to know about this. They keep going like this, these decision trees that you mentioned. And it's really quite remarkable. And it's, I mean, I felt better at the end, even though I was trying to complain. And I thought that, gee, this is something else. I mean, this is amazing that the modern world can use a machine to help somebody make feel good. Now, I still think that as you were saying, there are anthropologists who have exactly measured. The Spanish have 6 positions of the eyelid. We have 4 in North America. 6 gives you more gradients about what the person is like. They have taken, a slow, very, very fast brain movie and then slowed them down. And actually, somebody, a general, is doing this with a man and wife. So you see these 2 people interacting, and they are taking objective criteria, and they've got physiological sensors on them. So their skin conductance goes down, their heart rate goes up, their pupils go wider, and so. And what are they saying? And what's the husband doing? And so they are in a sense doing what you're suggesting: objective measurements, affective responses. So here we have the objective method of measurement, and then there's this machine treatment of it. You wonder, maybe just their machines talk to that machine, but nevertheless, it's a new ballgame as far as where does the patient, what's their role in all?
I mean, I suspect that you're right, because even like, let's say we're talking right now, I am looking at all of your faces, and my biological machinery, my neurobiological machinery, is picking up on all of the cues that you are giving me regarding to your attention, your interest, and I'm processing all of this sensory information, and I'm coming up with a conclusion about it's either time to wrap this up, or, like I'm doing this, automatically, right? And I suspect that why couldn't a machine pick up on these same cues? I mean, you're not being telepathic. I am, right? They can. And so I suspect as technology improves, doing things like putting a machine in a convalescent home that converses with the residents will be helpful to avoid depression or to avoid isolation, even though these are not human beings. These are just machines talking to you. I suspect that'll be true.
That's actually the way Amazon currently pitches some of their devices is, there's an example of a young man that goes and gives one of these echoes to his grandfather who lives alone and can't do X, Y, Z. And he comes back a week later and the grandfather becomes very well versed in using the device and is talking to it and that sort of thing. So I think they already kind of
they already are.
towards like a companionship.
Yeah.
So I'm a child psychiatrist. My name is Hong. So I was wondering, I think you alluded to we have fear. You mentioned that we are talking about this because we have fear. And earlier, I think earlier you also mentioned like AI is not gonna be. I think you mentioned something about job security.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be, make doctors out of work, but we just kind of do things more efficiently. I think something along those lines.
Yeah.
I was wondering though, since we have the discussion that we just had, plus you already know, for example, EHR Epic, for example, makes things more efficient, but at the same time, there's a lot of complaints already about doctors having to spend less time because we're supposed to, get more things done and spend more times on computers than with patients. So do you think it's just a fear, or is it inevitable that
Well-
eventually it will be just dehumanizing
Yeah,
medical care?
I think it's interesting that you bring up the EHR as an illustration for saving work. Because I will tell you, I don't think that the EHR has saved any time at all. I think what it's done is it's created a tremendous amount of jobs. Because now I have to hire an army of people to double check everything that I do, and now I'm expected to do more. So before I could just write a paragraph, I could just say, I saw patient so-and-so, lovely woman, 45, she has a brain tumor, this is her exam, this is her imaging, this is our plan. Paragraph, that's it. Now I write an H&P that has about 15 different categories, each one of which has like some CMS required list that I have to check off that someone else has to then verify that I've done so that my dashboard looks good at the end of the month. And if I don't, there's another person that's hired to email me and tell me that I haven't done these things. I mean, it's just like, so EHR, in my mind, if we're talking about using that as an example of efficiency and the reduction of work for human beings, it's only created work, in my mind. So I see technology in general, while there is a fear of it becoming dehumanizing, I think what's going to happen is that people will just do different jobs. Whereas before, your job was to check a person in to the clinic. As somebody sits at a desk and they check someone in. When we have enough artificial intelligence for you to check yourself in, like check yourself out of the grocery store, what's going to happen? We're going to hire people to help you self-check in. At first, right? And then once we get that down, we're going to learn how to self-check in, but that's going to create 3 more problems, for which we will hire people to do that until we figure out a machine that can do it, and this will just go on and on indefinitely. Because you think about books, okay? There's a wonderful painting from about 200 years ago, and I forget the painter. It's of a couple in a park under a tree reading books together. One is facing this direction, and the other is facing that direction, and they're both reading a book. And the implication is, look at the evil books. They're getting people to not communicate with each other. People are just engrossed in their books. I mean, and you would go, well, okay, that's one perspective, and certainly it's true that, yeah, when I'm reading a book, I'm not talking to you. But no one looks at books today as the evil technology that's destroying relationships. And so this is how I view all technology. I'm an Adam Smith Zoomer. I mean, I believe that pretty much all technology can be used for good reasons, and it doesn't have to dehumanize anyone. Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much for your talk. I also agree that gathering big data is kind of how our brain processes things, and through our experience, we build neural networks to select things out of our environment to focus on and to put importance on. And so and hopefully we'll be able to do that with data learning and machine learning as well, like from the smartphone data. And then tying it back to empathy, it reminds me of when a patient says they're in pain, they're clearly trying to communicate something. And so I don't like the idea of saying like, oh, you're not in pain. Like, look at your trace, you're walking around and everything. But I think as the clinician, you can take that and be like, something's wrong. They're still mobile, but like maybe they need social services. Like maybe I can refer them to that. And, you don't have to judge them for not knowing how to communicate the same way that like a neurosurgeon might not know how to communicate to their patient because they spend all their time with cadavers. And so I think empathy is more of a translation between people. Like, I see where you're coming from, and you have to listen, which is, I think you can teach people how to listen, but experience can definitely also play a role in like learning how to be empathetic even when you're tired. Like nurses, right, they work really hard, but yet at the end of the day they still have to like show they care about their patients, and the patients do think that they care even when they're exhausted.
Yeah. All right, it's 8:30, so I think we've come to the end of this amazing session. I feel better already. Yeah. I feel purged. So we're going to have another meeting in 1 month, and I don't know the exact. November 17th. And what's our next topic?
It's a case conference.
Case conference.
Well, multiple cases with a panel of 3 individuals.
Yeah.
Dr. Sheldon Benjamin, Dr. Dan Cross, and an as yet undetermined neurosurgeon.
Yeah, we're thinking of Dr. Stephen Saris, I believe, but he hasn't confirmed yet. Yeah. Okay?
Great, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.